we work with all the top AI labs and enterprises to train and fine-tune their models and AI agents. So an example of what that might look like in finance is financial institutions are getting into AI, as everyone is, and building AI agents. And these AI agents, like a chatbot or whatnot, need to be tested in real-world environments and trained by real financial experts. So what Micro One does is we built an AI recruiter. And with this AI recruiter, we're able to go out and source these financial experts who then work with these AI agents, with these financial institutions and any type of enterprise that we're working with to train their agents so that they're tested by real people and trained before they're deployed in the real world. And there's so much that goes into building AI agents in the financial world, so our panelists here are going to do an excellent job of explaining. But yeah, I just wanted to give an intro and also let Elena give a little blurb on Wells Fargo if you want to kick it off. Sorry to put you on the spot. We're co-hosting together, so want to also make sure you have a little speech.
Hi everyone, I'm Elena Honigshausen. I'm a relationship manager in early stage tech banking with Wells Fargo. We're a practice that's been around for 25 years and across the whole nation in San Francisco and New York as well. Veronica's here as well from my team, so definitely come over to us and chat. We focus on all things banking, but also can connect in concert with other members of our team across the organization. So we kind of take a banker, buyer, investor approach. So if any of those things are of interest, please come up to us and chat. But I look forward to meeting all of you as well and hearing from this awesome panel. But thank you guys, and can't wait to meet all of you.
Thank you. All right, I'll pass it off to Izzy, our moderator.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for coming again. It's been such a nice night so far, getting to meet some of you and chat, and looking forward to continuing more conversations after the panel as well. But maybe just first, would love if all of our lovely ladies up here wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves, name and your role, where you work, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Hi. I'm Montes. I work in Google Cloud in the professional services organization in Applied AI. So what we do is basically implement AI projects in different industries, so from finance to retail to oil and gas, we go all over. Different industries have different challenges, so very happy to be in this financial group. Definitely had a couple projects with finance, so very excited to hear from my co-panelists about this.
Awesome, it's great to be here with everyone. I'm Julia, I lead our go-to-market strategy at Rogo. If you haven't heard about it before, it's an AI platform that's purpose-built for the largest financial institutions in the world, really started with the largest investment banks, now focused on private equity, private credit, public markets. And in a previous life, spent a number of years working in traditional buyouts at Blackstone. But super excited to share a little bit more about all the AI I wish I had back in the day, and I'll put it over to you.
Very nice to meet everyone. I'm Emilia Mazzolenis. I'm a senior data scientist at Vanguard, helping lead the Gen AI evaluation efforts for the company. So every enterprise application that we have that's going to touch on Gen AI agents, something that we're going to evaluate and helping that effort. So yes, very excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Sangeetha, Bharath, and I lead AI strategy at Visa. And I think this is one of the most critical conversations to be having. It's very exciting to be able to decide and set standards for how AI is regulated and how it works and how it has access to financial decisioning. My background originally is technical with large language models and automation.
Awesome. Well, to dive in, Sid gave a little bit of an overview on Micro One, and to set the stage a little bit, maybe just to kick it off with a first group question, anyone can feel free to jump in, but I'm curious, in what parts of your business or your customers' businesses are you seeing AI be a real value add today rather than more of an experimentation phase and proof of concept? I'm curious where you're seeing it drive real value in your customers' businesses.
Yeah. I'll start saying that I think AI has been a hype word for the last 3 years, but some of my customers forget that AI is on not only LLMs. So AI has been working for decades, I will say, for traditional machine learning, maybe reinforcement learning applied in a different way, operations research, which is something I specialize on, to So very different areas of AI have been working. I know in the financial industry, likely some other industries. LLMs, obviously, a little bit of a different story. I personally think that we have nailed the single interaction with an LLM, like chatbot or whatnot. That seems to be pretty straightforward now, and I think we're leading towards a more experimental field with agents, multi-agents, all of that.
Actually, I think that's a really great point. I would honestly say the same, right? Like, predictive AI has already been employed in the financial sector for decades, you know? And I think, you know, like when I think about AI in the past and historically how it's worked, I think what's changing is the scope of autonomy, right? Like predictive AI, you know, we had models in financial services that would predict and flag a potential fraudulent transaction, right? And then there's the evolution to now something that we use regularly, the kinds of predictive AI that not only operate off of a flag, but then are able to make those sort of like block and allow decisions in real time. And that's you know, a very robust suite of deep learning time series models, and so I think that's generating real value today regularly.
I think there's a few different areas where I see this space too. So some are going to be more on the internal productivity of the employees that we have in the company, right? So things like helping retrieve information that we have. It could be helping the advisors that we have information. But then, or even developers like ourselves that are coding, just like some of those assistant tools. But then there's another big part of it, which is anything that's customer facing, right? So we want to automate customer support, for example. And then there's a third avenue too, which is more on helping with the research component of the work that we do, right? Whether it's the quant research or just any type of research that we do, so helping make that faster and more streamlined.
I feel like as the least technical person on this panel, I'll give you my hot take here, which is I think that LLMs are extremely powerful. I also think that they have really poor product market fit right now. And so what that actually means is GPT for Enterprise, incredible, gets phenomenal daily usage at a lot of the banks, the private equity firms that we work with. 99% of that is probably copy editing on emails. And so you have this extremely powerful technology. What does that mean in terms of the actual perceived value and then the real value? The truth is we're extremely early days. And so I actually think that when, you know, we go to market strategy side, we think about rolling out, it's you start super simple. What are the 1 to 3 things that you can say users can definitively go to ChatGPT for, some will plug for Rogo, you can go to Rogo for, and start there, build trust. From there, you'll begin to explore new and more nuanced use cases, but it's pretty crazy right now. We're talking about AGI at the same time that, again, most of the use cases are really just around copy editing and then personalized stuff, the stuff you do in your 5 to 9 versus your 9 to 5. So I'm super ambitious about what it can do, but I think in terms of what it is today, still super early days.
Yeah, absolutely. And Julia, kind of on that note, in your world of investment banks and hedge funds and private equity funds, where do you see similarities and differences when it comes to where people are choosing to start? Are a lot of your customers' journeys similar, or are they completely different? Would love to hear just about your little world in the private finance.
Big world, big world. And it's a great question. The honest answer is same destination, very different starting points. And so the common thread is that whether you're working at a private equity firm, a bank, a hedge fund, you're drowning in unstructured data, PDFs, SIMs, earnings calls, research reports, and you all want AI to take that information and make it into sort of an actionable insight. And so I think that that's universal. Where it gets interesting is where each customer starts. Investment banks come to us with a workflow problem. And they say they want to automate the junior banker grind, and I'm rolling my eyes a little bit. There's so many articles at this point about this. Comps, precedent transactions, first drafts of materials. And what that's saying to us is that the pain point is first labor arbitrage and second speed. Private equity firms, it's an entirely different starting point or point of entry, where the bottleneck is diligence. You're evaluating hundreds of deals, and you need to decide in very short order, do you do a deeper dive or do you kill that deal? And so the question is, can we use AI to, pattern match across industries, to surface risks, red flags sooner, to synthesize information that you have not yet synthesized, and then lastly, you go to hedge funds where it's an entirely new category altogether, where they're not impressed by automation because they're very quantitatively sophisticated, or at least predisposed to it. And they're not working with perfect private information like our private equity firms are. What they're looking for is an edge or alpha. And so then the question is, can AI help me find a non-consensus view before the market prices it in? And so the takeaway from all of this is that the common thread is just reduced time to insight, and that's very powerful. But what it also means is that there's this kind of concept of one size fits all with AI, and that just doesn't really work in finance. Operationally, it looks so different depending on who you're talking to. And so, from Rogo's perspective, the way that we approach really the 200 kind of largest firms in the world is, what are the use cases that are too sophisticated, the situations where the stakes are too high for general purpose tools to really succeed or to succeed fully. And that's sort of that latter question, less about the starting point, more about ultimately how do we arrive at that destination, and what's all kind of those steps that come in between.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And a big part of that is determining, what actually makes agents or system models really succeed within the context of these businesses. That's something that some conversations that we're having a lot, at Micro One with the enterprises that we work with. And so, Emilia, from maybe more of a technical perspective, how are you guys defining success internally? Are there any metrics, or what in your view makes something successful and can really work well?
That's a great question. It's quite hard to answer in highly regulated industries, right? It's not just in finance, but it could be things like healthcare as well, right? There's two layers to it. So one, we're going to have to look at the offline evaluation and then also the online evaluation. When we're thinking offline, one of the first things is there's subjective metrics that we can use, right? There's going to be the tool called accuracy, for example. If we achieve the task successfully, what's our accuracy there? But then there's also going to be subjective metrics, especially in places like finance, right? And this is where the SMEs come in the company. So, are we giving financial advice? Is that something that we want to do? And if we do, are we doing it correctly? Or if you're thinking about a chatbot, right? Is it having the tone that we would want it to be represented in our company? So these are areas that require a lot of collaboration with non-technical folks. But one of, I would say, the most important things is the trajectory level evaluation. Because again, highly regulated industries for us, it's not just about whether we got the answer right or not, right? In other industries, maybe something like looking at the final database state is enough to say it was successful. But we don't care just about the answer in finance, we care about how we got there, right? So knowing what the trajectory looked like, the reasoning that got us there is a very important part of that too. And then something that sometimes developers may oversee when they're first developing their AI agents is the adversarial attack side of things, right? Are we ready to not expose a lot of information that we have from our clients if anyone just goes and talks to a chatbot that we may be having, right? So are we ready? Is it if someone puts an attack at us, can we just answer the things successfully? So all of that comes offline, right? So this is are we ready to be in production? Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? But then when we move to online, so once it's deployed, we have to continue evaluating and making sure that it's still working like it should, right? So that's where things like anomaly detection, drift detection, all of these things come in. So with offline, it's basically, are we ready for production? But then with online is how can we make sure that it's still safe, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And this concept of moving from pilot to production is really where we're seeing a lot of companies get stuck. And you bring up evals, evaluations, whether it's a frontier evaluation or a contextual evaluation, is really what we're seeing as an unlock to at least start getting things moving in the right direction, helping you better understand your agents or your models or just the behavior, little visibility into what's really going on inside these complex systems. And so, Melissa, you work with a wide variety of companies, not only finance companies. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, are there any takeaways that you see that really is a differentiator in helping teams operationalize AI in addition to evals, aside from just being stuck in more of the proof of concept phase?
Yeah, so other than what Emilia said already. I think it's important to move from that MVP, POC phase, right? Like it's always hard to move from there to actually putting into production. I'm gonna talk outside the actual AI and talk about more integration, because there's so many things about data governance, data privacy, depending on the industry, a little bit harder than others, but even like industries that you would think are not as regulated, like for example retail, they also care about these things, right? Like they also don't want a competitor have Walmart's operating or like know-how. So I think those two things. First, data governance is very important. With that, you don't need exactly the AI experts, rather you need your technical team outside of AI, that is like data, right? Even the business owners to understand, align on the metrics that Emilia was talking about, right? And then how do we pass this from, okay, this is a nice tool that I can build very fast with whatever, Claude Code or Gemini, to actual production, right? So that would be like the two things. Data privacy is also an important one. And then compliance is one thing, and we already discussed that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sangeetha, in the context of Visa and in systems that are touching really high stakes workflows like transactions, where risk is really real, are there any extra barriers that you come across or any extra requirements that your team is thinking through for these more high stakes, really sensitive types of workflows?
Yeah, I mean, so earlier I was talking about predictive AI, right? Like contributing value as it is today. So when we think about what's incremental, what additional requirements we need, I think that starts from like what's different really truly about these systems. I'll just use the same example I was kind of talking about, right? Like an AI that gives you a flag that you need to go then review. That's a tool. It's a useful tool. An AI that takes that flag and takes that information and then can make a real-time decision based off of it. It's more like an operator. But now we have these systems that can take that information, get that data, not only initiate but negotiate and execute multi-step financial workflows across systems, across data sources, across different contexts. So the requirements, the stakes there are, we really need a scalable accountability infrastructure for these kinds of systems. I think, my fellow panelists here, Emilia, Maria, you already brought this up in terms of how does this actually look with governance, data governance, and the right types of evaluation. But trust should be an engineering requirement. I think one of the unique challenges, opportunities, I guess, with agentic AI is there's only so much you can validate deterministically. You like, and then in a high stakes decision specifically, right? Like a confident false answer is a lot more dangerous than just I don't know or I'm not sure, and bringing in the right subject matter experts to review. So I think that sort of building back in that uncertainty quantification, that's a challenge that I think a lot of frontier labs are facing right now. How do we actually do that? And even for us, for those of us who are not at frontier labs but are figuring out how do we actually deploy these systems and get value out of them safely and securely, it really does require that like robust new evaluation architecture fundamentally, like systematic monitoring and maintenance across accuracy, consistency, different edge cases, everything, right? I think that ultimately is a really, really critical piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And Emilia, maybe from your perspective, are there different hurdles or different, failure modes that come up that you see often in practice versus production? So when you're in the experiment phase, how are you able to identify or pinpoint mistakes and scenarios, and how does that look different than when an agent is live and in a real workflow? And you just talk about how your team thinks about that and goes after that, because it's obviously such a big jump.
Yes, absolutely. And so there's a difference when we're evaluating things offline and when we're actually evaluating things that users are interacting with, right? So we have an idea of how users will interact with our apps, but then at the end of the day, they can do whatever they want, right? Like if I have, let's say, a chatbot, and I'm making it very clear that we're not gonna give financial advice. And then if I'm a user, I'm probably gonna still try to get some financial advice from it, right? And so the main issue that we're facing is a discrepancy of like what we're evaluating is like how we think users will behave, but we don't really know because humans are unpredictable, right? And we may give disclaimers, and we may give we may give an idea of what the app will do or will not do, but we don't know what users are going to end up doing, right? So that's one of the things. And then along those lines, also in terms of the attacks that we are exposing ourselves to, right? And so following back on what other hosts were saying too. A lot of the times in finance, we need to think like if we have an agent, right, that may have like, let's say 5% efficiency gain on whatever metric that we're working with, whatever we're trying to automate, right? But then we have like a 10x increase in like the risk that comes associated with it, right? Because of how users are going to interact with it, then that may not be something that we want to productionalize, and we may have to make some of those strategic decisions there. So those are some of the main things that we've seen.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and it's interesting. We're seeing this trend of autonomy within financial institutions and other enterprises as well, but it's no longer much of a technical question. It's really become a question of risk and trust and visibility and maintenance, and all of these really come into one. And in finance, where it's this industry that has very little to no tolerance for error, it's interesting to see how people are responding and combating this in different companies and businesses. And so, Julia, going back to your big pool of customers, I'm curious what the biggest pushback is or concern that you get, because of course, bringing in a new tool as a bank or some type of fund can be scary, because not only does your team have to trust it, but your entire customer base is relying on you too. So what's some of the dialogue that your company, Rogo, has with your customers when it comes to concern and risk?
Totally. I mean, guys, the pushback is super predictable, which is actually a great thing. It means we're probably in the right line of work, working with the right customers. The first is obviously data security. You're working with customers that are managing billions, if not trillions of dollars. They can't have their proprietary research, their deal data getting leaked. So we've built our security architecture to meet that bar being really what is the standard for the most regulated institutions in the world. And that's not a feature, that's absolutely table stakes. I think the second is, unsurprisingly, hallucinations. We talked about this before, but finance is a domain where you put the wrong number on a page, and that's not just embarrassing. It can be embarrassing if you get your fitness routine wrong, you get a recipe wrong, whatever else ChatGPT feeds you. You get a number wrong, and you're deploying $2 billion towards a deal, and it's pretty catastrophic. And so the way that we've built Rogo is really with that in mind. Everything being source grounded, being transparent. Every sentence, every number being rooted back in institutional grade real-time data is important. And then also just actually building our model architecture in a way that has very real guardrails around minimizing, to the best of our ability, any sort of hallucinations. But then the last, and I think that this is the most interesting, it is certainly the least publicly covered, but it just came up actually, is change management. The technology absolutely works, right? And there's a reason why people are still using ChatGPT for the most part in these enterprises for emails. And it's because how do you convince a senior partner who's been doing the same thing the same way for 25 years and is extremely well compensated for it, again, we're talking private equity, hedge funds, banks, to trust this platform, that it's going to do the same thing for them. If anything, hopefully, if we're doing this right, do it better. And same thing goes for analysts. We're talking to new folks who basically just graduated, they got their undergrad business degree with the help of ChatGPT. How do you convince them that Rogo is in fact different, that other models do in fact exist, and also how do you convince them and build the trust that this isn't going to just automate their job away, which it won't. It is my genuine belief. And so sitting on the strategy side of the house, it's where the go-to-market work gets really interesting. Really what we're selling is not just software, it's really selling a new way of working. And so you do have to meet people where they're at. That change management piece that just came up is actually quite important to do that well. It comes up all the time in these processes.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to talk about high stakes workflows and payments at Visa, naturally these models, these agents, they do make mistakes. And in payments, it can, be a matter of millions or, it's a wide range depending on who your customer base is or your user is. And so how do you think about acceptable error rates in, such an important and sensitive part of your business?
Being very payment specific for a second, right? I think what's interesting about this entire topic is the cost there's a pretty significant cost asymmetry, right? Like with a false positive, if you're allowing or you're blocking a legitimate customer, right? You're going to lose trust, revenue. I mean, customer experience, obviously very critical. With a false negative, you're allowing fraud in. And that is a real financial loss. And it's also a potential loss in systemic confidence. But when we think about this broadly, right, I think that this is actually a really interesting decision theory problem in applied AI. It's interesting to think about what that actually means for us when we start evaluating it, right? A lot of my fellow panelists were talking about what does it actually look like in practice to essentially put these evals in place, right? And I think that's something that we really have to think about in high stakes decisions, right? In financial systems, fraud evolves as we set up defenses for it, which is a really interesting problem to solve. So I think when we talk about acceptable error rates, it's a little bit of a moving target, right? I don't think that I think that to say acceptable error rates implies that we can get the error down to a steady state and then stop. And so I think with agentic systems, we have to understand that this is really about building long-term frameworks for evaluation because the acceptable error rate is a moving target.
Yeah, definitely, and that's something we're seeing as well when you think about accuracy or success. It's not something that's binary or can easily be measured. It's something that needs to be maintained and adjusted and evolve over time. So bringing it back to the group a little bit, I'm curious if each of you have a takeaway from thinking about maintenance over time for these AI systems, and if there's something you've learned, in progress as things have changed maybe, or when things go right or things go wrong. Is there one part that has really stuck with you in the topic of maintenance and developing these systems as businesses evolve and customers evolve and laws and policies and everything in the world that does change?
Go first. I think you pointed it very well. Change is basically the only constant that we have here, right? And we need to understand a few things. So it's like we were saying, right? So there's going to be new attack strategies that are going to be developed, and you may no longer be as safe as we once thought, right? There's also going to be changes in how people interact with the systems. There could be a change in the market, right? There's some event going on, and so people are going to interact with our apps differently because of that. And a lot of times people also go for, instead of having in-house LLMs, which some companies do, working with third parties, right? And so we work with an API. Let's say that we're using some of the Gemini models, for example, right? We need to understand that they're going to release new versions. And that means that the app, if we update to those new versions, it may behave differently than what it did before, right? So we need to reevaluate everything again, because it's just if you're a developer and you're making a change in your prompt, right? It may fix some part of it that you were trying to solve, but it could ruin a lot of other things in a more hidden way, right? And the same thing can happen when there's an update to the model that you were working with. So there's a lot of change coming from many different parts. And on top of that, the regulatory changes that we could see too, right? And the product changes themselves. So all of those things are the constant. What we need to make sure is that we're building apps that can be easily changed when all of these changes are taking place.
I think that really inspired me, because I think one thing that we haven't really spoken that much about is like the importance of standards. Like being able to actually set standards in this ecosystem is really, really important. I mean, just a quick note on that. I think like when we think about building trust into our products that use AI, I think Melissa was talking about this in terms of data governance and stuff like that. It's really critical that we see trust as not just aspirational, but something that we can actually measure and quantify. So.
You guys were talking about trust. I think it's important that we understand not only chatbots, but in general, like an Agentic is just an autonomous system. How do I demonstrate the stakeholder that AI is performing as a human? So how do I convince them? You need to build some, I'm going to mention two things. First, human in the loop every time. You cannot have a system that's fully autonomous. So how do you guarantee? Where are you going to put your head? How are you going to guarantee your board or your senior stakeholders that it's not going to break one day and it's not going to make a terrible financial decision, right? Like you need to put the human in a strategic place in order to make your users trust the tool. That's one thing. And then the other thing, how do I measure that, right? Like I have to measure that my system is either meeting the human standard or outperforming. But I need to demonstrate that with numbers. I cannot just say, okay, my chatbot is replying just as good as, right? How do I measure that? Do I have a bank of questions? I'm going to measure towards that. Am I going to have a human evaluating all the time? Those are two things that are not specifically from the model, but like if you want your system to survive and pretty much like your users to trust them, that's what you need to do.
Financial context where there's so many regulations you have to think about. Also the idea of a bot running crazy over internal systems, it's difficult enough to even just enable file chat in Rogo, for example. But I think what's interesting is that concept, how dynamic the bots are, how individualized they can feel, the ability for them to not be super prescriptive. That is something that absolutely we should emulate in enterprise. I think that as all of these new, obviously for us, that's something that we're figuring out, okay, maybe it's not as secure as it needs to be. I think it's our job sort of to be more vertically focused, to figure out how to actually go and emulate that same sort of architecture, that same experience, but do it in a way that's okay. That kind of passes muster for these types of institutions.
So any other questions, or should we? This will be the last one, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay.
So this one goes to it's about something that you mentioned of factoring in trust as we design AI products. How do you think of measuring it beyond the traditional MBA system? And also
I'm happy to start off, but I'm so glad you asked that actually, because I think we talk a lot about building and deploying and adopting AI, and we don't talk a lot about how do you maintain it. How do you maintain these AI systems long term after we build them, right? And I think that's really the critical piece of like what trust infrastructure means. It's like how can we think through honestly, let me like be real with everyone for a second. Like I think as an industry, as people in the society, we are really geared and socialized for quick wins. Deploy this, ship it, right? Like put it into production, get that win, pitch it to the market, move on, hype cycle, right? And so I think part of it is a little bit of a mindset shift also towards longer term thinking, more sustainable, scalable thinking, where we can build these evaluation frameworks that require subject matter expertise. They require kind of investment in resources, and it takes time to iterate on that and build that and integrate it across all of your different systems. So it is a little bit of a mindset shift as an industry to kind of to embrace that we are going to have to build really good ways of evaluating and holding our AI systems accountable over time.
I'd add to that too. I think it's a lot about the evaluation side of things, but evaluating at scale, that's the important part too. Because again, these systems, they can be unpredictable, right? We don't know what the output that's going to be generated will be. And so trying to evaluate as many different test cases as we we possibly can. And then the other thing is not just looking again at like the response that if you're thinking about it as some sort of like agent that for a user it looks like a chatbot, right? If I just look at the response from the agent to say whether it was successful or not, I may be missing out on a lot there, right? Because if there was a tool call that was made when it shouldn't have been made, even if the agent didn't give you the output of that tool call and show that to the user, right? But if it still made it behind the scenes, we can be putting ourselves at risk. And so that's how we start to build trust with a very thorough evaluation framework that we run at scale, and we're looking at all of these different components of it.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. I'll let you take it from here.
You go for it.
Thank you. No, thank you all so much for being here. We have the room and the space for another hour, so please stay and mingle and chat and debate and question and fantasize and enjoy the food that we have and the open bar that we have. And yeah, thank you all so much for being here. We're really excited to continue having more of these types of conversations and think about, the different ways that we can collaborate and grow and support each other. And I learned so much from tonight, and I'm so excited for all that's to come and think about. So yeah, thank you all so much for being here.